We are live, Chairperson.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Joe Phil Borja. I am honored to be helping chair this Vineyard Area Planning Advisory Council / CPAC meeting this evening. If you happen to join by mistake and you're looking for another CPAC meeting and it's not Vineyard, sorry to hear that. Hopefully you can find the right CPAC meeting. Other than that, Madam Clerk, would you be so kind to get us started with your procedures or the opening statements that you say before every meeting?
Yes. In compliance with directives of the county, state, and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, this meeting is live streamed and closed to in-person public participation. Temporary procedures are subject to change pursuant to guidelines related to social distancing and minimizing person-to-person contact. To make a verbal comment at today's meeting, dial 916-875-2500 and follow the prompts to be placed in the queue for a specific agenda item or off-agenda matter. When the chair opens public comment for a specific agenda item or off-agenda matter, callers will be transferred from the queue into the meeting to make a verbal comment. Written comments are always accepted. Send your email comments to boardclerk@saccounty.net. Your comment will be routed to the board and filed in the record.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we've now called the meeting to order at 6:35 p.m. Can we please start with a roll call, Madam Clerk?
Member Brantley?
Here.
Member Johnson? Member Miller? Member Miller? Member Sylvester?
Here.
Member Thompson? Member Trotter-Getzy? And Member Borja.
Sorry,
Present.
Trotter-Getzy's present.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, online using the Blue Jeans link, I do see Member Miller available. Member Miller, by any chance, were you muted? I do see Member Miller online. Wondering if you can just give us a verbal cue. If not, we can't hear you by any chance if you'd like to rejoin. But Madam Clerk, do we have a quorum?
We do have a quorum.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Let's move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could just recite the pledge with me. Madam Clerk, if you can lead the pledge.
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. And before we begin, if we could just ask the members of the Sacramento County staff to please introduce yourself and maybe give us your first and last name and the program and or the division that you're working on. That would be great. Thank you.
This is Thomas Vogt, the Office of Planning and Environmental Review. I'll be giving a presentation today.
Thank you, Thomas.
This is Jessica Brandt with the Office of Planning and Review. I'm a senior planner, and I'll be backing Thomas up in case you have some questions that might need my help. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
And my name is Stephanie Townsend. I am the clerk for the clerk of the board's office.
All right, perfect. I see a couple more names under the moderators. Are they not speaking this evening?
I think there's some audio issues. They are just helping to moderate, so I don't think they'll be speaking tonight.
Okay, understood. But I want to give a shout out to Florence Evans, Alma Munoz, and Clarice Thomas. I just want to recognize you three, even if you're not speaking. I see that you're under moderators, so I appreciate your time and helping us here.
So Member Miller is back.
Welcome, Member Miller. How are you?
I'm here.
All right, thank you. Okay, if we can move to the first presentation, please.
Your first item is the SB2 Housing Production Streamlining and Acceleration Amendments to the General Plan, Zoning Code, and Countywide Design Guidelines Workshop.
Alrighty, this is Thomas Vogt with the Office of Planning and Environmental Review. I'll be presenting this CPAC workshop item today. Next slide, please. So in 2019, the Sacramento County Office of Planning and Environmental Review received grant funding, which we call the SB2 grant, from the state of California. The goal of this funding is to encourage the development of plans that streamline multifamily housing approvals and accelerate all types of housing production. Per staff began this effort by reviewing the existing zoning code, general plan, and design guideline language as it relates to housing. Staff also referenced feedback provided by community stakeholder groups, such as the Building Industry Association, as well as the American Institute of Architects, to further inform the potential amendments that are being proposed. After review and initial outreach was completed, staff identified key areas for amendments, which will be outlined for you tonight. And as a summary, these include amendments to the zoning code to address development standards, allowed uses, and review processes related to housing development, amendments to the zoning code related to new state mandates around density bonus programs, and amendments to the multifamily design guidelines to comply with new state regulations requiring objective design standards for multifamily residential development, and also to mirror the proposed zoning code amendments that were listed previously. So the actual specific language for each of the amendments is still in progress. And at the end of this presentation, staff is hoping to discuss the proposed scope of the amendments with the Vineyard CPAC and request any recommendations for specific changes or concerns that the Vineyard CPAC. And the intent is to have the full strike-through language available for a Planning Commission workshop meeting in late July. Next slide, please. So the first target area is expanding the range of housing production types allowed in low-density residential zones and in commercials. So these amendments would allow small duplex and multifamily products in these low-density residential and commercial zones by right, and it would allow larger projects with a use permit. So when we say small projects, we're talking about projects that are of 10 or fewer lots or units. It's important to note that there's going to be no change in density for each zone. So, for example, if you had an RD4 residential zoning district, which allows 4 dwelling units per acre, and you had a half-acre lot, that lot would still only allow 2 units, either as 2 single-family dwellings or as 1 duplex. So there will be no changes in density. There'll be changes, though, to the allowed housing types, so like a duplex versus a residential development. The overall goal is to provide more flexibility in design, as well as the redevelopment and infill of some of these smaller underutilized properties throughout the county. Next slide, please. The second target area of amendments is for the multifamily residential development standards. We've often heard from developers within the county that the multifamily development standards can be burdensome and will actually prohibit any sort of multifamily development within the county. It's been difficult for developers to meet the minimum density of these multifamily lots, let alone a target density, due to some of these development standards, such as setbacks or parking. So we are looking to amend some of these key development standards, like I said, like setbacks or open space, parking, or landscaping, to basically allow for multifamily housing to be developed on these properties. One example of a standard that we're changing would be our front yard setback, change from 25 feet to 20 feet. And to ensure that these amendments don't go too far into areas with predominant low-density residential development, staff is proposing to create an infill property category that would retain some of these more restrictive standards that we currently have within the zoning code. And an infill property would be something that, or a lot that is 2 gross acres or less, with at least 2 adjacent properties zoned for low-density residential. Next slide, please. The third target area is the process for requesting deviations from multifamily residential development standards. So currently, to deviate from our standards for a multifamily development, you need to request a special development permit from the Planning Commission. That's a pretty costly permit, and it takes a while. I think it's over $10,000, and it takes quite a bit of time to process. So staff is proposing the creation of a minor special development permit, and that can be used for limited deviations to development standards and design standards, as well as some deviations to accessory dwelling unit standards. This minor special development permit would be very similar to our current minor use permit, where the decision would be by the planning director instead of the planning commission. And there would actually be no CPAC review, but it would be appealable to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and it would also be subject to CEQA. The cost of this minor special development permit would be similar to a minor use permit, so around $1,200 to $1,300. So we're still working through the exact reach of this staff level minor use or a special development permit, so we're still figuring that out right now, but we would definitely like feedback on what you believe would be the highest extent of deviations that could be requested through this minor special development permit. Next slide, please. A fourth area of targeted amendments is zoning code language related to density bonus programs. So a note that these density bonus programs, it's unrelated to some of the other amendments that we've been discussing, and it pertains only to multifamily residential projects that have regulatory agreements to serve certain target populations. So, for example, you can see on the screen here, these density bonus programs would apply to multifamily projects that cater specifically to college students or disabled veterans or homeless persons or affordable units. So these would be separate from these market rate changes that we've been discussing. And the reason for this is that state laws have changed pretty radically since this density bonus program was originally written into the zoning code. So we're basically updating the zoning code to be compliant with state regulations. Next slide, please. The fifth area of amendments is for the countywide design guidelines. So recent state legislature has required local jurisdictions to use objective standards when reviewing the design of multifamily residential development. So for an example, right now, our design guidelines use subjective standards. So an example of that would be fences and walls should be compatible with surrounding areas. But an objective design standard would say only wrought iron fencing along street frontages. There's a key distinction there. And so we are amending to propose the countywide design guidelines for multifamily residential projects so that they become design standards, objective standards. They would be treated kind of the same way as a development standard, and actually a special development permit could be used to deviate from some of those design standards. Most of these design standards that we're proposing are made from existing design guidelines. So we're kind of taking this existing document that we have and we're making it something that's more objective. And then there also are some new standards that will be introduced. Next slide, please. And the final grab bag of proposed amendments, you can see up on the screen, there'll be amendments to our emergency shelters section, as well as permitted supportive housing, adding definitions for both and places that those would be allowed, as well as modifications to internal procedures, application forms, and the user guide to address Senate Bill 35 and 330, which basically streamline housing development projects. And this is all something that is coming from the state. So these are things that we're doing to our zoning code to make sure that they're consistent basically with state law and state guidelines. And next slide, please. So currently we're within our workshop phase. So we're going to all 14 of the CPACs from May through June to discuss our proposed amendments. We will finalize the draft amendments to the zoning code, the general plan, and the countywide design guidelines, and then have a workshop meeting with the Planning Commission in late July of this year. And then we're aiming to have a final hearing for this proposal and these amendments in December of this year. And if you want to follow some of these updates, you can see on the screen. If you go to our webpage, planning.saccounty.net, under our What's New section, there's a link to the specific SB2 webpage, so you can check that and see what new information is available there. And if you have any specific comments after this meeting, or in general, you can send them to Jessica Brandt. She's also on this call, but that's her email address right there, brandtj@saccounty.net. And contact information is also available on that SB2 webpage. Next slide, please. And yeah, so I wanted to open it up to members of the CPAC and yeah, to see if there are any comments, any concerns, any questions about any of the proposed amendments.
Thank you for the presentation, Thomas. I'd like to open it up for discussion for the members of the CPAC. If you have any questions, now's the time.
Hi, this is Member Brantley. Thank you for the presentation tonight. I was wondering about the parking requirements for, so just to kind of put this in like general terms, when you say there's a half space per unit reduction, what does that, so that's for like if it's an apartment complex, that type of thing? I don't know, could you maybe expand on that a little bit? Because that would, I think that would be a concern about reducing parking space when we don't, especially like in our area, we don't have like transit options out here in the Vineyard area. So reducing parking doesn't seem like a great idea.
Yeah, I can touch on that. So in general, we've been reducing basically all of our multifamily development standards, and so we're taking a look at other jurisdictions as well as our own code to see if our current standards really were either burdensome or if they actually provided what they needed to provide. And so some of those amendments that we've proposed, we found that those are more in line with basically what's needed to be able to develop some of this multifamily housing. But that's definitely something that I can take a closer look at and make a note of that. I'm sorry that we don't have the full text here now that you can review, but definitely I will take a look at that, and then definitely encourage you to take a look at the draft text when it's available before the Planning Commission.
This is Jessica. Just to follow up on that, I think we have a two-tier system for parking allowances for multifamily. One is if you're within a certain radius of transit, and then another if you're not. And we were looking to make to that half reduction was basically going to make them all the same. So it was that allowance when you're near transit. Again, as Thomas was saying, it was sort of looking around at other jurisdictions and their requirements. It may not be the wisest thing to do in areas that have limited transit. So that's something for us to consider for sure. And then we're also looking at some areas of allowance, like allowing for street parking if there's available street parking to count. Sort of looking at it as a more holistic kind of view, as opposed to we expect X number of parking spaces and on your particular property. So there's definitely some options there. Yeah.
Thank you. And then in the open space requirements, can you just, I guess I just didn't understand waiving the requirement for private open space to allow for ease of development and greater variability of products. Does that mean, in my head, that means less open space? And I think definitely with the pandemic, we need more open space. So could you just expand on that a little bit, what that would entail?
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. Open space is great, especially as we've learned during this time. But the private open space refers to balcony areas and kind of areas that are private just to the unit itself. For some of these smaller developments, the intent was allowing for more site amenities to be shared by all, and then having less of that sorry, I'm blanking on the word, less of the private open space because it's something that's a little bit easier to develop when you have it for the whole development and not necessarily just for the unit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we were looking at the sort of the opposite end too, where in some of our areas, Arden Arcade, for example, there's are a number of underutilized hotels, and they often are looking at potentially turning those into, I guess you call it affordable by design multifamily. And a lot of them don't have that private open space, and they may not need it. They're within walking distance of parks or, transit, or just as far as being able to change the use of that building by right. That seemed to be something that was a stumbling block. And if you look down in, Midtown, those sorts of areas, you don't always see private open space get to a certain density. So yeah, that's the reasoning behind that review.
Thank you.
This is the Jofo Borja. I did have a question about the ability for SB2 to really facilitate housing affordability, particularly for lower and mid-income households. Now, I'm trying to kind of ascertain from the presentation, but I don't believe there's any proposals for an actual reduction of fees. Is there, or am I misreading it?
No, I think you hit on it. This is the SB2 grant provided us the opportunity to review our zoning codes, not as much on the fees side, building permitting fees, impact fees. So that's where we were focused with this effort, is more on the regulations. I think the idea is that the more we chip away at some of these development standards, the process, that will hopefully help ease some of that burden. But yeah, you're right. No, there's nothing in here that's directly related to reducing fees.
Okay, so for a lack of a better term, I think we're kind of getting into like a better streamlining, for example, and having a better good governance and removing some of the barriers or duplicative red tape. I'm just wondering too, though, per SB2 and the HCD guidelines, you mentioned about the sequence shot clocks, or at least the time shot clocks. Were there any identified turnaround times in the county approval process that could potentially expedite returns and review of projects? Are you all proposing any internal changes on your own response time, just to help builders with comments, or at least getting a project moving forward?
Well, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Not this banner. I'm trying to think of other efforts. SB 35 and SB 330 were both bills that we're trying to get at that. We have to, if someone gets in through SB 35, there's a streamlining component there. SB 330, one or the other, I always get them confused. SB 330, I think, is the one where you have a lock on your development, the impact fees. And so we have those sort of in the mix, but not necessarily as part of this. I'm trying to think. Yeah, the only thing that's close to that would be maybe the minor special development permit, with the idea that we're trying to draw back some of that processing for these special development permit requests. I don't know, Thomas, do you have any ideas on that?
I was just going to mention, the special development permit, reducing that hearing body, because that is, in my experience, one of the more frequent holdups to multifamily development is, when you have a 10-month entitlement process, that can really slow things down. But now reducing this should, bring it down to 2 or 3 months, ideally. And that with a design review. And so, we could get housing products through much, much quicker, I think, with that special development permit.
Yeah, on the building permitting side, I know that BPI has been working on improving their turnarounds, just as as a improvement of their own just department. But yeah, what are you thinking, Chairperson?
Just
that in.
more. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. It's just more so kind of a broader look at, okay, outside of changing the regulations, have we had an opportunity to kind of just take a step back and look internally at our own processes? Like, what is the typical turnaround time from, the planning side to the review side? Then fire gets involved, and then traffic gets involved, the environmental folks, the water folks. There's a lot of very many hands in a pot that may impact a larger scale housing development project, for example. And so just trying to see, the previous president had a kind of an expedited environmental look. It's like the one federal decision where everybody's just kind of, you get a project, everybody's going as fast as they could because there's that 120-day clock to kind of get all of the permitting approvals kind of going. And so I'm just curious to see whether or not that's still, that type of practice or, process can be replicated, or at least just the the essence of that thought that everyone's going to be working at the same timeline together rather than it being kind of a singular linear approach where one team handles this, then it goes to the next team, and then the next team goes there. So it's kind of a linear process instead of running out of words here, but you're having kind of like a parallel review, for example. So that in itself would be kind of like an internal change that I've seen some MPOs and some RTPs kind of look at internally, and they kind of use that instead of just, hey, which regs are kind of slowing us down. So just interested to kind of see if that's something that the county had looked into.
I mean, not with this effort, but I know there are others where we're trying to, just like you say, kind of get that process more parallels rather than one long train, where there's one stop, then the whole thing stops. I know our current agency administrator for public works or development services, I guess. He's working with the task force on that. But yeah, I totally agree that that's definitely something we hear that just as much, if not more, than hearing about the regulatory framework is the process itself and improvements that could happen there for sure.
Okay, thank you. So Sacramento and Sacramento County is considered a large county. So for the record, I believe our county received close to $625,000 of grant funding from the state on this. So that is being used right now for basically the planning team to take a look at all of the improvements, and now it's being workshopped or presented to every CPAC. And then it will go through the planning commission and then the board of supervisors. What's the next steps?
That's correct. Yeah, we'll go to the workshop with the planning commission, and that will be with the full strike-through text. And then after that, the environmental document for this effort will be prepared, and we will go to the planning commission again for a recommendation to the board of supervisors, and then that will be hopefully approved, and then it'll come into effect 30 days after that final date.
I think there's another 30 days for the general plan amendments. Yeah, anyway, sorry.
Okay. Why would there be an environmental for this? Wouldn't this be a subject to an exclusion? Because you're just changing kind of like the laws, or are you more so like looking at the potential environmental impacts of the changes itself?
Yes. Thomas, do you mind to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, I'll
Yeah, okay.
take it. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go.
Okay. Yeah. So some of the proposed changes will be either reducing a hearing authority, or they will be changing the description of a project. And so in that case, we would need to assess through the CEQA lens if that change in discretion is going to have any effects on the county as a whole. And so that's something that'll need to be assessed. Jessica, I don't know if you have any other insights into that.
Yeah, I think we are talking with our environmental coordinator about this, because we do believe there might be the path to get an exemption on this project because it's part of this SB2 grant funding. I think the concern is that sometimes with the CEQA exemptions, when there's specific ones created by the legislature, they often leave out counties. I don't know why, but there's, for example, there's an exception or an exemption allowance for infill housing projects, but it's only within cities. And so we can't use it, which is, I think there's at least some movement to try to rectify that. But yeah, but we're definitely looking at that. But there is the potential to have an impact with these changes because they are the zoning code. There's like, for instance, we're reducing or we're allowing residential in office business professional zones, still with a use permit requirement. But you have to look at the whole of, well, okay, now if you're allowing these residential projects in these zones, does that change or will there be impacts on the people who are living there from being in those areas that they may not have had otherwise? So there's some sort of just sort of thing through CEQA. So yeah, I would love to just exempt it and be on our way, but I've been told that's not an option, at least not yet.
Okay, understood. It's kind of mind-boggling to kind of not look at a categorical exemption for kind of a paper change when the built environment still remains the same. Even if you like change the regulations, the project will still go through environmental. So this is like kind of an environmental analysis on your proposed change. I don't know. For some reason, I'm having a tough time a little bit kind of grasping why there's kind of more work. But sorry, I apologize. Any other questions from the rest of the CPAC board before I take too much time?
Oh, hi, this is Member Sylvester, and this may be a very rudimentary question, but I live in Vineyard, and my neighbors are very close to me, and one of our other members mentioned that earlier about living in a COVID environment and wanting to have sufficient distancing and space. And I travel to see my relatives in Utah, and they have lots of space between their homes and housing developments like ours in Vineyard. And I know they're in Utah and we're in California. I understand that. But is that something that you all deal with? Is that something that's ever on your agenda? And I know KB and Lennar Home Builders are two big companies that build most of the homes in our areas, and there's some other ones as well. And I know the price of land is expensive. I know all those things. But I guess it's just a gee whiz, wishful thinking kind of a question on my part. Is that something perhaps in the future that maybe we could at least look at that and discuss perhaps having more space between a lot of these home developments that are being built? And that's all I have.
Thank you, Member Sylvester.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Member Trotter Getsy. Welcome, Member Sylvester.
Thank you.
Just a little insight. When things come to us, as far as the CPAC is concerned, they usually come to us as individual projects, so individual developments. And as far as changing zoning codes for different amounts of RD, different amounts of houses that go on the land, I've been on the CPAC quite a few years now, and it's just in my experience, there's been a pendulum. So when I first started years ago, there was more of a push to keep this area out here with lower RDs, not as close up or congested. But we're definitely kind of going the other way now with homelessness increasing, or at least us being able to see it more and whatnot. I would say that there is less of an appetite to push for more space. at least out here in the Vineyard area. I don't see, I'm drawing a blank now. Mary, what's Mary's last name, Joe Hill?
Um,
I'm drawing, Duncan.
Mary Duncan, yeah, sorry.
She's not here tonight, but she's actually been on the CPAC even longer, so she might be able to give you a more historical view on it. But that's been my experience lately. So yes, we do get individual projects that come before us, but at least currently, we're not pushing to make those less dense.
Well, thank you so much.
Sure.
I did have a question for the county staff. So, as we report this to HCD as part of the grants process, is there any measurable outcomes or any kind of grading system that y'all could potentially see like a year from now or 2 years from now to kind of, determine whether or not the proposals that you have made, assuming they would be accepted by the Board of Supervisors, did create a positive change to speeding up the process for permitting or at least getting these homes developed?
That's actually a really good idea. I think the state grant itself, their deliverable is the change in the regulations, and they're not necessarily asking for much more than that. But I think it would do a disservice if we didn't follow up and make sure that these didn't actually have some sort of impact. We do have reports and sort of a status tracker that we do as a development services wide. And it does show number of, building starts, commercial and residential, square footages, accessory dwelling units, we track those. And so I think that could probably be a good way to measure it and see what sort of impact these might be having. So yeah, I like that idea. I think that's an important callback to the board, in a year or two.
Okay. And that internal measurement that you all have, is that publicly available to the community, or is that something that you guys are kind of just tracking internally?
I don't know. I can certainly check on that and get back to you. I know it's something that's done again through our administrator for the development services department, and it rolls up a whole bunch of stuff. And I do think we share it with some outside agencies like the BIA, for example, Building Industry Association. So let me check into it and respond back.
Okay, thank you. I'd really appreciate that. As you folks may be familiar, BIA has been rather intrigued at how to speed up the process, and they've also been behind a lot of the proposed CPAC changes. Something that Supervisor Natoli had mentioned in a hearing, I want to say pre-COVID. The YIMBYs were also in there, and one of the issues were that it was believed that CPACs add to the length of time that housing developments can take in the county. And so we really didn't get a chance, I think, after that hearing to determine whether or not that's a factually true statement outside of anecdotes from paid lobbyists. So it would be really good to see, is it, not being able to hear, or is there other kind of like external things that impact projects from moving forward, or is it really hearing bodies like CPACs? Because if it is, then, I would be one first to say, well, we should do something about it, because we should be a hearing body, but we shouldn't also stifle development if need be. So any information from the county would be very appreciative as to see, what kind of measurements, what kind of gauges you guys have, score sheets, trackers, something to that extent where it's not just the builders who are looking at it, but hopefully the whole community can access that as well.
This is Member Brantley again. I had a question around so I've only been a part of this committee for a few months, and I only witnessed a couple meetings before that. But it seems my observation has been that the things that come to the CPAC are projects where they're trying to change, the zoning, like the RD sizes and things like that. And so I'm just wondering if one of the stumbling blocks for development is, like, I'm not sure when the next time the general plan is going to be updated, because I think that, like, in Vineyard specifically, maybe people have other ideas of what the spaces should be used based on, like, more recent developments. I'm not sure if that's one of the stumbling blocks to getting, because that's just another step in the process for them to get an approval. And then I had one other, maybe I can get your response to that. And then I just had one other comment about the zoning code amendments. And I could totally be far off because I'm new to this, but I'm not sure if that's part of the general plan needing to be updated. I'm not sure if us only seeing things that are about changing the RD sizes is something that's indicative of the general plan maybe needing to be updated.
Yeah, I'll take this one, Jessica. So part of our amendments, we didn't cover it as much during this presentation, but we have identified some policies within the general plan which are prohibitive to the changes that we're proposing to make. And so we're actually proposing to change some of those. And the general plan in general kind of is a rough framework for development within the county. And so we're trying to change some of the policies to allow for like quicker development or the easier multifamily development, in the hopes that, like you said, it would be less of a roadblock basically for projects going down the road. A lot of the bigger projects, I know Vineyard has had some very large subdivision projects. Those would definitely be checking with and involved with the general plan, so that we could see these changes kind of ripple through some of those larger projects. And as those are broken down, then it'll change there. Did that address your question?
Yeah, and I guess just as a basic question, when is the next update for the general plan, or how often is that done? Because isn't that where, like, the zone, like the RD, isn't that how, like, each area of the county is zoned based on the general plan?
Oh, yeah. So the general plan updates are limited to for a year. We intend to kind of group this amendment up with some other amendments that'll be occurring later in the year. But the changes in zoning, the rezones, those are typically an applicant-led effort, and those are something that would come before the CPAC again. So those like changing from an ag property to a residential, so from an AG to an RD zone, that would be more of an applicant-driven process.
And I think it's larger, if I just go out a little more, I think you're asking more on a larger scale of the next general plan. Yeah, so the general plan is updated roughly every 10 years, and we are getting close to when we're going to start the next round. And the thing with Vineyard is that there was a large effort on community and master planning and creating specific plans. for various areas in Vineyard to do this new growth. And that all took place over a period of time, 15, 20 years ago. And it's set up, it was tiered off of general plan updates that the general plan doesn't drive the zoning. What it does is it drives overall land use. So it'll be kind of big blotches on the general plan land use map, and you'll see like kind of a big yellow area, and that's just generally low density residential. And then to be consistent with that, the zoning would be something like an RD5 or RD1 or RD10. And then you get other kind of blotches of color. And then in between the general plan and the zoning, you have these specific plans. And so a lot of the areas in Vineyard were put into these specific plans, which kind of then took that big blotch of color, that yellow or whatever, and made kind of like a butter yellow and a mustard yellow, and and started to kind of break it down further. So these we will allow to go to a zoning between RD2 and RD5, and these ones over here would be RD7 or RD10. And then the developers would then come in from there and say, okay, we would like to now change this from, this ag zoning to this RD5, which is consistent with the general plan, consistent with the community plan, but it requires a rezone. That's what has happened. What has also happened, though, is that there have been a lot of these developers that have come in and said, we really can't make our projects work at an RD 2 to 5. We would rather have them at a more dense development. And so they're asking to change even the specific plan from like a 2 to 5 to say that it's okay to be like an RD7. And so that's what you probably have been seeing a lot of, is these sorts of tweaks to this specific plan and then tweaks to the zoning for these projects. And those have to be reviewed through this public hearing process because they do change the nature of the overall specific plan and all of the sort of pieces that went together in that. A bit long-winded. Does that give you a little bit more context?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that. So when you're talking about in specific for Vineyard, I'm not sure how much, but is it like North Vineyard Station? Would that be an example of where they?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And then so then kind of switching gears from that bigger comment over to back to your guys' zoning code amendments. The one other area of concern is on slide 4, when you guys were talking about general reduction in all setbacks. Front yard, like the example that you gave was front yards being reduced from 25 feet to 20 feet. And I was wondering, so when I looked at the zoning code, if it was reduced back to 20, that would kind of eliminate the separated sidewalk idea, which makes it a little bit safer for pedestrians. But it seems like that might kind of eliminate that product, if you will.
Yeah, that would be an unintended consequence for sure.
Okay, and then
I want to look at that. Okay, yeah.
And then, and I guess just as a general comment, and maybe kind of piggybacking on what Member Sylvester said, was I don't know if there can be anything done in the zoning, but to kind of help make the communities more walkable, and I'm not sure where that is, and helping these subdivisions be like interconnected so that so when I look at a community like Elk Grove, where they have trails like and in North Vineyard Station, it sounds like when I've looked at that plan, they have like it's a great plan for having paths and walking trails and multi-use trails and things like that. And I don't know if there's anything in the zoning code that can support that. I guess that would make it more work for a developer. Although I don't know if I feel too bad for developers, because when I look at their profit margins right now and I look at how much money they're making, it seems like they make a lot of money building houses. So to make the properties smaller and the lot sizes smaller doesn't exactly make much sense to me. but if there's anything that we can do to make the communities interconnected for children walking to school, for families walking, being more outside. I think if the last year, again, has taught us anything, is that people need outdoor space. And so I didn't notice anything really in this, but it is unfortunate to set back it just seems like it would take more green space away from communities if you're taking away more of the front yard. And making, it just makes the homes closer together and things like that. So those are just kind of my comments and not necessarily a question, but that would be my feedback in general.
Oh, that's all great feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, member. I just wanted to add, Sacramento County does have a ongoing active transportation plan update, and I believe that we probably should hear something about that, because the final plan should be coming in at actually the draft plan should be coming in May to September of this year, and a final plan right around September, December of 2021. So there should be community workshops that's already happening throughout the county. But to the member that last spoke, I think that's Member Brantley, I just want to encourage you to participate or see if there are any information about these active transportation plan workshops, and really complete streets updates that the county, without having to put Mr. Vicari on an awkward spot, but Ron Vicari is one of the directors there for transportation. But we want to make sure that complete streets, active transportation, even just the availability of bike lanes, or even just the county understanding where there are no bike lanes or where their assets might be missing, would be a good start. So when we have developers, we can encourage them to say, look, as part of your plan or as part of the Melrose that you're paying for, if it's a new build, that you're also paying for complete sidewalks, some connectivity to the trails, and then, access to schools. So those things kind of percolate. But yes, I highly encourage you to be active in that space and continue advocating, if not for our generation, maybe our future generations, right?
Yeah. Where would could you tell me what it is again?
Yeah, I don't want to misspeak for the county staff, but I believe it's walkbikesaccounty.net. And for all transparency, I do not work for the county, so I'm just really interested in all this stuff. So walkbikesaccounty.net, I think, is ironically, it's Sacramento County's first active transportation plan. So good to hear from that. I did have a quick question for the planners presenting the SB2. I didn't see a lot of connectivity to the housing element and maybe discussion to RENA. How are these plans and proposals that you are presenting right now, and obviously hopefully going to be approved by the Board of Supervisors, how are they going to impact kind of your housing element, and also the needs assessment as it impacts with RENA and SACOG as a larger view? And I guess my next question would be, are we meeting those RENA needs, or are we still significantly short? And could you attribute any of these changes to potentially getting us there?
So those are fantastic questions. I wish we had one of our housing long-range planners with us, because I think they could answer much better than either Thomas or I. But in general, I can say that this is a complementary effort, but I wouldn't say that they're connected directly. I think we're, again, kind of coming at the housing availability and affordability issue kind of from the side, to trying to get at some of these regulatory items, since the state has provided us this grant money to do it. The housing element itself, they're working on right now. This is like one of the programs that's being listed in the housing element. And some of our work in here is programmatic in the housing element as well. The potential reductions in development standards, some of the expansion on what can be built where. Those are definitely things that we've put into the housing element so that the state can see that we're trying to hit on some of these push points. The RENA, we are no, we're not meeting. We're not. And I think there is also a potential effort to do some rezoning. Because we don't meet our RENA, which for folks that aren't familiar, it's the Regional Housing Needs Assessment.
Correct.
Yeah, which is every jurisdiction is sort of assigned a number of housing units that we're supposed to show that we have the capability to not provide, but there is space and zoned land available to meet the needs of populations at various income levels in our jurisdiction, based on a lot of demographic factors that go into it. Sacramento County does have a large chunk of housing that we need to provide for very low and medium income households. And the last time we did an update to the state to show that we had at least the capacity to build that property, it was basically a lot of it was about RD20 zoning to capture the very low income and low income housing. Then in the interim, we had the recession, they had the bubble and then the recession, and then we've been climbing back out, and we aren't able really to demonstrate that we have been able to provide, or we haven't shown that developers have come in at the level of units that we need in order to meet, obviously, the needs in our area. And so for RENA going forward, we're looking at, there's likely going to be a rezone program that's going to be part of the housing element that also is going to take some of the SB2 funds as well. And we're going to work with property owners to rezone properties from RD20 to RD30, which is what the state says now because of land prices and construction prices is where we will have to be in order to provide the housing that's needed for those groups. So yeah, it's unfortunately this effort seems big to us, and I think it will make a difference, but it is definitely sort of a only one building block in the overall sort of fight to get more housing on the ground for all levels of income. So a bit long-winded there. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. Thank you. I appreciate it. And for my fellow members, the county or the local jurisdiction gets in trouble if the state determines that they didn't do a good enough job in reaching their RENA goals, which sometimes does happen, like in the Bay Area, for example. So what happens is that the developers get to a different ministerial process that they basically just bypass a lot of the permitting requirements as long as it meets certain criteria. So from what I'm hearing from your explanation, Ms. Brandt, is that we're not even in that spot. It's just the developers haven't even come there. So it's not that the county is providing a roadblock. There just hasn't been as much appetite for developing. Is that a kind of a bad summary?
I think that's fair, and it's also, there is a lot of work we can do on our side, and so this is part of that, is to try to make the path a little bit easier for these developments to come in a little less expensive, a little quicker.
Okay,
so
to incentives. Got it.
Yeah.
Understood.
And this is Member Trotter-Getty. I just kind of wanted to piggyback on that a little bit, especially for Member Sylvester and Member Brantley, just because they're kind of new. Although, we might have certain ideas and desires for what we'd like to see in our area, we do have to keep in mind all of these other state laws that regulate, the number of housing number of housing units we need to have and in which categories. And so that's kind of why I say the pendulum swings. And so, for a while there, we were able to, keep space where we wanted space and whatnot. But then as we get closer and closer to being evaluated by the state and not having what we're supposed to have, then we need to, take that into consideration when projects come before us. And even if land is set aside for more dense housing, if we don't have policies that make it feasible for developers, they're not going to come in and do low income housing or high density or, whatever you want to call it. So unfortunately, it's just a whole lot that we have to consider when we are, when all these things are coming before us as far as development goes.
Very well put, ma'am. Thank you for that addition.
I did have one more question for the planners on the setbacks. Now, if I'm reading this correctly, multifamily setbacks have a larger setback than single family and you're adjusting for that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so currently, yes, the multifamily developments have much larger setbacks than single family, and specifically within the code, there's setbacks for multifamily that's adjacent to single family, and it basically so an example of that is if there's a 2-story multifamily complex, there's a 50-foot required setback, which is a lot. And it scales up. So if it's a 3-story, then there's a 75-foot setback. So some of our proposals or our proposed amendments will reduce that down to a much more realistic and manageable level.
And so why the original setback that's so much larger?
That is a very good question. Jessica, I don't know if you have any insight into how long that's been in the code, but as long as I've worked here, I've seen it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a legacy item. It's been in the code for a very, very long time. And it's basically the thought that multifamily should be as separate from single family as possible.
Okay. That's kind of what I was curious about, what the logic had been. And okay, so in other words, the idea of this is to make the multifamily housing more a part of the rest of the community that it's in?
Yes.
Yeah, and in certain situations, there'll be, so as it's currently written, you might have a single family home on a multifamily property. And if someone were to try to develop a multifamily development next to the single family home on multifamily property, they would be subject to those large setbacks. So we have these multifamily zone properties that aren't developable because someone has built a single family home within that zone. So this will kind of rectify those issues so that our current multifamily zones will be more usable and utilized.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Any other comments before we hopefully move into the completion of this item?
The only other thing I wanted to mention, what Chairman Joe Hill mentioned, I want to make sure that that's in the notes, the idea that there should be some kind of a rubric or some type of a measuring device that can show whether or not this plan really has resulted in multifamily housing being able to be built, I don't know, easier or at a more rapid speed, et cetera, because we get lots of these plans or amendments that come before us, and then we never hear whether or not they were effective. So it's just kind of, a one and done type of thing. And then we're like, well, hopefully it worked.
Hi, Member Trotter-Getty. This is Stephanie. I just want to let you know that will be in the action summary. I do have it in my notes.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you. Do we have any public comments on this item, Madam Clerk?
We do not have any public comments, verbal or written.
Okay, thank you. Well, I just want to give a big thanks to our county staff, and I might have forgotten to give you an opportunity to do some closing remarks, but if you'd like to finish up with the closing remarks, please go ahead.
I don't think we have anything particular. I just want to thank everyone for the great discussion. We got a lot of good things out of this, so we appreciate the engagement. I did want to make a note that for the workshop, we will send out notices to all of the CPACs, letting you know when that's scheduled. So you're able to at least look at the materials, if not be a part of the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please keep up the good work, and we really appreciate your time. Let's move on to item number 2, staff updates. Are there any staff updates, Madam Clerk?
I don't believe we have any staff updates.
How about member updates?
Yes, ma'am. That is our next one. Okay, item number 3, member updates. I did have one quick comment to share. If you recall last CPAC meeting, or maybe might be 2 CPAC meetings ago, there was a public comment regarding Spiva Road that was brought up to us. It was 10396 Spiva Road that was brought up about the change of use on that property. And there was a public comment, and a gentleman called in and said that they were worried about the use of that facility changing from, I believe, a senior housing facility to a kind of a drug and rehab facility, and whether or not it has been going through proper community engagement and approvals. I did also receive another email from another neighbor adjacent to that property, asking that this recovery center go through the appropriate chains of approvals. And so what we did receive an email on April 20th from Richard and Catherine Nelson that I believe was received by the CPAC Vineyard. Went ahead and forwarded that over to the chiefs of staff for both Don Natoli and Patrick Kennedy. And I'm glad to say that they are on top of it. And on top of that, I was also able to get the code enforcement chief to be on top of this as well, to make sure that the center is just going through appropriate levels of review, and if there are any concerns by the community members, that they be heard and be addressed. So I have not seen any other updates since then, but I did receive a thank you message from Catherine Nielsen, who was the second family member that stepped up and asked for our assistance, because for some reason she hasn't been getting a lot of answers, and I guess the CPAC team is the first one that got her answers. So, yay, good government. So, we are moving with that. So I highly encourage you all to. Supervisors Natoli and Kennedy staff have been amazing, and the county staff as well, in at least addressing our issues and concerns. So I know Mr. Bill Thompson's not here, but I've been still trying to get him a meeting with Supervisor Natoli and the fire marshal, because we're still trying to address those roadway links. But more to that as follows. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Any other comments from the members of the group? Okay, hearing none. Any?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. I was looking for my unmute button. Okay. So what, and Stephanie might be able to answer this for us. So who are our current members now? Because it's been so long since we've met in person.
Yes.
I don't even know who's with us anymore.
We have the current members are listed on the agenda. We have Chairperson Borja, Vice Chair Brantley. We have Member Johnson, Member Thompson, Charter Getzi, Member Miller, and Member Sylvester.
So Junkin is no longer with us?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any other comments or any public comments, Madam Clerk?
We have no further public comments.
Okay, thank you. I did have one quick question. Do we have any guidance as to when we can resume meeting in person?
We currently do not have any guidance. That is something that we are working on, and as soon as we get more information, we will certainly pass that along to the CPAC.
Okay, understood. Yeah, I think that might be it, unless anybody else have any questions, concerns, comments, going once, going twice. All right. If it's okay with you all, I'd like to adjourn the meeting at 7:49 p.m. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thanks. Good night.